The first time I heard the howling, I thought it was only the wind moving through the Appalachian trees. I was sitting beside a dying campfire somewhere deep in the mountains of Appalachian Trail, wrapped in two blankets, while pale fog drifted between the pines like slow-moving smoke. The trail had been empty for hours. No hikers, no birds. Even the insects had gone silent, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The only sound was the soft crackle of wet wood burning beneath the dark. I remember staring into the trees beyond my lantern light. Thin branches swayed gently, brushing against each other with a dry, whispering sound. Every few minutes, I heard something moving far off in the woods. Heavy footsteps, slow, careful, like something circling the edge of camp, but refusing to step into firelight. I kept telling myself it was a deer, maybe a black bear, maybe another hiker who didn't want to be seen. But then the smell came. Wet fur, mud, rotting leaves after rain. And somewhere beyond the fog, I heard breathing. Not animal breathing. Human breathing. Low, patient, close enough that I could almost feel the warmth of it drifting through the cold night air. That's when I noticed the footprints around my tent. They looked almost human, except for the claws. And that's when I saw it standing between the trees. The Appalachian Trail felt endless that evening. Late autumn, cold air pressing down through the trees like a heavy hand. I set my small tent at the edge of a forgotten bend in the forest. No trail markers nearby. No distant hikers. Only fog rolling low between the trunks, pale and slow, like breath held too long. The ground was damp under my boots. Leaves soaked and soft, releasing that wet, earthy smell that clung to everything. Somewhere far off, would snap once, then nothing again. By the time the sun disappeared, the forest had already gone quiet in a way that felt wrong. Not peaceful, not natural, just waiting. I told myself it was just isolation, just distance from everything familiar. But the silence felt like it was listening back. Night settled without stars. Fog thickened until even the trees felt close enough to touch. Inside the tent, I could hear my own breathing, slow and controlled, trying to match the rhythm of calm thoughts. The zipper rustled when I adjusted it, a soft metallic scrape that sounded too loud in the stillness. Hours passed, maybe more. Time started to lose shape. Then I noticed it, a second rhythm outside. Not wind, not branches. Breathing, low, steady, close enough that the tent fabric moved with it. I froze. The air outside pressed inward, as if something was circling slowly around me. Each pass came with that faint drag of weight through damp leaves, slow and deliberate, around the tent. Again and again, I stopped moving completely. Even my thoughts went still, like the forest had reached inside my chest and pressed pause. Sometime after midnight, the breathing changed. It got closer, right beside the tent wall now. So close I could feel warmth through the fabric when it exhaled. I didn't look. I couldn't. The canvas shifted slightly, not from wind, from pressure, from something leaning in. A faint sound followed, sniffing, slow, testing, like it was learning what I was without ever seeing me. My fingers dug into my sleeping bag, knuckles tight, nails pressing through fabric. Every instinct told me to move, to run, to do anything, but the forest outside felt heavier than fear. It felt like certainty, so I stayed still and pretended I was asleep, even though I knew it could hear the difference. The hours blurred. The breathing never left. It just shifted position, circling again and again, sometimes stopping for long moments right beside my head, separated only by thin fabric and frozen air. Once, I heard something else. Footsteps. Not human. Not quite animal either. Too slow. Too intentional. Like something learning how to walk properly from memory instead of instinct. Then silence. Then that same slow breathing again. At some point, I stopped tracking time altogether. The world became a narrow space of tent walls, fog breath, and the certainty that I was not alone inside my own isolation. Morning came without light, only a gray washing over the forest. I didn't sleep, not once. My body ached from stillness when I finally forced myself to unzip the tent. Cold air rushed in, sharp and biting. The forest looked unchanged at first glance. Quiet, empty, almost normal. But then I saw the ground. Footprints, circling the tent in perfect loops, pressed deep into wet soil and scattered leaves. They weren't human. Too wide, too heavy, too spread apart. Larger than any wolf track I had ever seen. Larger than anything that should have been moving so close, so carefully, around a sleeping place. My breath caught before I even understood what I was looking at. And then I noticed something else. A few steps away between the trees, a shape stood still. Tall, upright, watching. No movement, no sound, just presence, like the forest had decided to hold it there for a moment too long. I couldn't see its face through the fog, only the outline, too straight, too patient. Then, as if it had never been there at all, it was gone. No rustle, no retreat, no breaking branches, just absence. I packed my things without thinking, hands shaking, breath shallow. The forest stayed silent the entire time. Not even birds, not even wind, but I kept feeling it. That pressure behind me, that slow, circling memory in the air. When I finally stepped away from the campsite, I didn't look back, not once, because part of me already knew it wasn't something that left when morning came. It was something that simply waited for night again. The ranger station sat deep in the Appalachian woods, far beyond the last maintained trail marker. Late evening, cold rain tapping against metal siding, fog pressing low between the trees, like a living wall. Inside, the air smelled of old wood, damp paper, and burnt coffee that had long gone cold. A radio sat on the counter, crackling softly even when no one touched it, static rising and falling like distant breathing through broken wires. The ranger didn't like visitors after sunset. He said the forest changed when light disappeared. I remember him sitting behind a desk, eyes half-shadowed under a dim lamp, tired face, stiff movements, like sleep was something he had forgotten how to do. "Stay off the trail after dark," he said quietly. Not a warning, more like something he had repeated too many times to still feel new. Outside, wind pressed against the windows. Slow, heavy, like something moving along the walls of the station without ever revealing itself fully. The rain got worse by nightfall. The radio began acting strange. Static bursts, sharp, sudden, almost like voices trying to form but giving up halfway. The ranger didn't react. Not at first. But I noticed the way his hand stayed close to the drawer beneath the counter. Unlocked, then locked again, then checked once more. He didn't look outside anymore, not even when branches scraped the roof. That was the first thing that felt wrong, because everything in the forest was moving tonight. Everything except him. He told me about missing campers just before midnight. His voice stayed flat, controlled. "They came back," he said, days later. A pause. Long enough that the rain outside felt louder. They didn't speak. Static from the radio filled the gap after that, rising, falling, twisting like something trying to listen through broken channels. I asked what they saw out there. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned off the lamp. For a moment, everything went dark except the faint glow of the radio dial. Green light trembling against wet glass. That was when I heard it, scratching, above us. Not outside the walls, not in the distance. On the roof, slow, deliberate, moving in circles, like something testing the structure, learning its edges. The ranger stood up immediately. No hesitation, no confusion, just action. He locked every window one by one, even the ones already shut, even the ones that hadn't opened in years. His hands were steady, but his breathing wasn't. Shallow, controlled too tightly, like he was holding something back. The scratching continued, never stopping, never speeding up, just circling above us. Patient. I looked at him when it paused for a moment. That silence felt worse than sound. He didn't meet my eyes. Didn't look at the ceiling either. Just stood there, listening to something I couldn't understand but felt in my teeth. Then the radio burst again, louder this time. A long wave of static that almost formed a rhythm. Almost like footsteps, almost like breathing. The ranger finally spoke, but it wasn't to me. "Still here," he whispered, like he was confirming something, or fearing it had gotten closer than expected. Later that night, I noticed the marks outside the back window. Muddy, deep, dragged along the wood like claws too large for any animal I knew. They led away from the station and into the trees, not toward us, as if whatever made them had come close, then decided to return to the forest on its own terms. I stood there too long watching them disappear into fog. The ranger didn't follow my gaze, didn't even turn his head, just sat back down slowly, like the weight of standing had become too expensive to maintain. The scratching stopped just before dawn, not gradually, not fading, just gone. That kind of silence felt wrong too, like something had simply decided it was done being heard. The ranger finally unlocked the drawer under the counter. He didn't take anything out, just left it open, and for the first time all night, he looked toward the forest, not with curiosity, not with fear, with recognition, as if whatever had been circling the roof wasn't the strange part at all, as if the strange part was that it had circled without entering, and beyond the glass, the trees stood still again, waiting. The river was narrow where I camped, hidden deep in the Appalachian forest, where the trees leaned close like they were listening. Late night, cold air rolling off dark water, mist drifting just above the surface, breaking apart and forming again like something trying to remember its shape. My tent sat a few feet from a bank, close enough to hear every ripple, close enough to feel the water's breath in the ground beneath me. Everything felt still at first, too still. Even the insects had gone quiet. Even the wind seemed to forget itself between the trees. Only the river moved, slow, black, endless. It started after midnight, a sound upstream. At first, I thought it was an animal crossing the water. Deer, maybe. Something familiar enough to ignore. But it didn't sound right. The steps were too even, too steady. Splash, pause, splash, pause. Like something moving with thought instead of instinct. I sat up inside the tent, holding my breath without realizing it. The river carried the sound closer, bending it around rocks and branches, until it reached me like a whisper dragged through water. Then it stopped. Complete silence again. That silence felt heavier than the noise. Minutes passed, maybe more. Then I saw it, across the river, a shape standing between the trees on the opposite bank. Tall, still, the fog wrapped around it in slow layers, hiding details that I didn't want to see clearly. At first, I told myself it was just a trick of distance, just branches, just mist. Then it moved, not forward, not back, just slightly to the side, like it was pacing, watching the water, waiting for something to respond. My throat tightened. I didn't make a sound. Even my breathing felt dangerous. The river kept flowing between us. Black water, reflecting nothing, not even the sky. The figure remained on the opposite bank, unmoving now, as if it had noticed I noticed it. The forest around it felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain, like the trees were leaning away from it instead of toward it. Then the lightning came, sudden, white, brutal. For half a second, everything became visible. The river, the stones, the wet leaves, and the figure, closer than before. Too close, not standing back in the trees anymore. Right at the edge of the water. Its shape wasn't right. Too tall, too narrow in places where nothing should narrow. And its arms hung too still, too heavy, like they didn't belong to it. The light vanished. Darkness swallowed everything again. But my mind kept the image alive. Too sharp, too clear. After that, every flash of lightning brought it closer. Not running, not walking normally. Just changing position between moments of light. Each flash revealed a shorter distance. Less forest between us. More water reflecting nothing at all. My hands pressing the ground outside the tent, feeling cold soil soak into my palms. I didn't remember moving there. The river sounded louder now, like it knew I was watching, like it was reacting. Then another flash, and it was almost across, standing in the shallows, water moving around its legs without breaking its shape, still not fully visible, still refusing clarity, just enough to understand it was real. I backed away into the tent slowly. Every movement felt like it might trigger something, like attention itself was dangerous. The river kept talking in low, endless motion. The figure didn't move again. It just stood there listening, or waiting. I couldn't tell which one was worse. Then the final lightning strike hit, longer than the others, bright enough to burn the world into stillness. Everything froze in that light. The river, the trees, the fog, and the bank on both sides. That's when I saw the prints. Massive paw-like shapes pressed into the mud along both edges of the river. Not just one side. Both. Like something had crossed back and forth without ever being seen doing it. Or like it had never needed to choose a side at all. The figure was gone, but the prints remained. Fresh, deep, still holding water in their shape. Dawn came without color. Just gray spreading slowly over the forest like a bruise, fading too late. The river looked normal again. Quiet, ordinary, almost innocent. But the banks told a different story. Circles of disturbed earth. Heavy impressions leading nowhere and everywhere at once. I didn't follow them. I didn't need to, because I already knew. Whatever had been pacing that water wasn't gone. It had simply learned everything it needed to know about the crossing. And I had been standing on the wrong side the entire time. Snow fell without sound. Not soft, not gentle. Just thick and endless, swallowing the mountain trail behind me until even my own footsteps stopped feeling real. The storm had come too fast. One moment, dark forest, narrow path, frozen wind. Next, wide out, complete, absolute. I remember pushing forward until the world lost its edges, until trees became ghosts, until the idea of direction stopped meaning anything at all. That was when I saw the cabin, half buried in snow, leaning slightly to one side like it had grown tired of standing, dark with age, roof heavy with ice, windows dim and clouded from the inside. No smoke from a chimney, no light, but shelter is shelter. Or so I told myself. The door opened easier than it should have. No lock, no resistance. Just a slow creak, like something exhaling after a long silence. Warm air drifted out. Not heat exactly, more like stored time. Old wood, dust, something faintly metallic beneath it. Inside, the cabin was intact, too intact. A table in the center, chairs pushed neatly in, canned food stacked in careful rows, firewood cut and arranged beside the hearth like someone had planned to return at any moment. But there were no mirrors, none on the walls, none on cabinets, not even glass that reflected properly. Only dark surfaces that swallowed light instead of returning it. That detail stayed with me longer than it should have, because cabins always have mirrors, or at least reflections of some kind. This one felt like it had been stripped of them deliberately. The wind outside grew louder as night settled. Snow pressed against the windows in thick waves, muffling the world until the cabin felt sealed inside its own silence. I tried not to think about how quickly the storm had buried my tracks. Try not to think about how easily the forest had let me go. Inside, I lit a small fire. The flame felt weak at first, like it didn't want to stay alive in this place. But it caught eventually, casting uneven light across the walls. And still no reflections. Only shadows bending strangely in corners that seemed deeper than they should be. That was when I heard it, beneath the floorboards. A sound like slow movement, dragging, pausing, then dragging again. Not frantic, not desperate, patient, like something underneath was listening for my reaction before deciding how to continue. I stood still for a long time, listening, the fire crackle behind me. But even that sound felt distant now. The floor creaked again, closer this time, right beneath where I stood. I stepped back slowly. The movement under the wood stopped immediately, as if it knew, as if it was learning me the same way I was learning it. I found the journal later that night, wedged beneath the bed frame. Old paper, soft at the edges, ink faded in places where fingers had touched it too often. The handwriting was uneven, hurried, then calmer near the end. One line repeated more than once. Never look outside after 3:13 a.m. That was all it said at first. Then pages of scattered notes. Descriptions of sounds under the cabin. Of footsteps that matched no pattern. Of a presence that didn't enter rooms. It simply became aware of them. And always that same warning. 3:13 a.m. Like the time itself mattered more than whatever came with it. I stopped reading when the fire flickered. Just once. As if something outside had shifted its weight in anticipation. The hours passed slowly after that. The cabin settled into a rhythm of silence and waiting. Snow pressing harder. Wind thinning into distant pressure. The fire shrank. Not suddenly. Just gradually losing strength like it was being watched too closely to survive comfortably. And then 3:13 a.m. arrived. I didn't check a clock. I just felt it. The kind of shift in air that doesn't announce itself but changes everything anyway. The floor beneath me went still. Even the fire seemed to hesitate. That was when the tapping began. At the window. Soft. Measured. Not urgent. Not random. Like something already certain I would answer eventually. I didn't move. The cabin seemed smaller in that moment. Like the walls had leaned inward slightly to listen with me. Another tap. Closer to the glass this time. The snow outside glowed faintly under moonlight, but it didn't illuminate anything clearly. Just shapes without definition. I kept my eyes forward. Not looking. Not reacting. But the window changed. The darkness in it deepened. Like something was standing just beyond the surface. And then it tapped again. Right beside my line of sight. I made a mistake. Not looking directly. Just noticing. A reflection formed where there should have been none. Faint. Wrong. Not the cabin. Not the fire. Something standing behind me. Too still. Too close. I turned slightly without meaning to. Just enough to understand I shouldn't have moved at all. The shape outside the window didn't mirror me. It didn't copy anything familiar. It simply existed where reflection should have been empty, head tilted, watching through glass that didn't behave like glass anymore. And the tapping stopped. Everything stopped. Even the fire. Even the wind. Even the thought of sound itself. I didn't move again. Couldn't, because the reflection stayed there longer than anything should have. Not fading. Not shifting. Just waiting on the other side of awareness. The cabin felt colder then. Not from outside weather, but from recognition. Like something had finally been seen properly for the first time. And I understood, too late, why there were no mirrors in this place. Not because they were removed, but because nothing inside this cabin was supposed to ever be witnessed from both sides at once. The window darkened again, and I stopped looking. The trail climbed higher than I expected, cold air thinning with every step, fog rolling over the ridge like a living tide swallowing everything behind us. A small group of hikers moved ahead of me, tired, quiet, breathing heavy in the thin mountain air. We were close to the Appalachian overlook, where the forest gave way to cliffs and empty sky. But the forest didn't feel ready to let us go. It clung to us, in mist, in silence, in that strange pressure between trees where sound should have been, but wasn't. It started as distant wind, a low howl somewhere far above the tree line, not close enough to locate, not natural enough to ignore. The group slowed without speaking. We all heard it. That was the problem. The wind shouldn't carry direction in that way. It shouldn't feel intentional. But this did. Like something calling from a place the map refused to show. The fog thickened as we climbed. Trees became shapes. Shapes became nothing. Then one of us stopped. He said he could hear his name. Whispered. Not from behind. Not from ahead. From everywhere at once. We told him it was exhaustion. Wind distortion. Echoes in the ridge. But he didn't move again for a while. Just stared into the trees like they had already answered him once before. We found the bones near the path. Hanging from branches. Not scattered. Not random. Arranged. White against dark wood. Swaying slightly in the cold wind like ornaments left behind by something that understood warning better than language. No one spoke after that. Even breathing felt louder than it should have. The forest around us seemed to narrow. Not physically, but in awareness, like it was watching more closely now. By the time we reached the ridge, the sky had disappeared. Only fog, only gray light bleeding through nothing. Then the howls returned. Closer now, layered, multiple, not a single source. Too many directions for one creature to belong to. One of the hikers whispered that we should turn back. No one answered, because we all already knew we couldn't tell where back was anymore. Night came without a horizon. The campsite formed in silence, each person moving like sleepwalkers trying to pretend the forest wasn't closing around us. Then the trees above the cliffs changed. Something moved between them, high up, too fast for its size. A shadow crossing stone and fog without sound or weight. Every time lightning flashed through the storm clouds, it appeared again, closer than before, never in the same place twice, always watching from above. The first glow of eyes came just before midnight, high on the ridgeline, yellow, pale, still. Then another pair appeared beside it. Then another. No movement, no blinking, just presence layered across the cliffs like something waiting for permission to descend. The fire we built felt smaller, instantly, not physically, just less safe, like it had stopped believing it could protect anything. I remember the moment it moved, not the whole thing, just fragments. A shape crossing stone above us with impossible speed. Too heavy to be fast. Too silent to exist. Branches snapped somewhere far away. But nothing fell. Nothing broke. It was like the forest refused to acknowledge impact. Like even sound was being ignored now. We didn't run. Not because we were brave. Because the fog had erased every direction that wasn't straight into uncertainty. The howls stopped suddenly. Not fading. Not drifting. Just ending. That silence felt worse, because it meant whatever was calling us no longer needed to announce itself. At dawn, the ridge was empty again. No eyes, no shapes, no movement above the cliffs. Only wind returning slowly like nothing had ever disturbed it. But the bones were still there, and the path still felt narrower than before. One of the hikers laughed softly, like relief had finally caught up to fear. But no one joined him. Because we all noticed the same thing. The forest hadn't let us leave. It had simply decided we were done being watched from above and ready to be watched from within. The fire tower stood alone above the tree-line, rusting metal, leaning slightly into the wind like it had forgotten what stability felt like. I reached it just before dusk. The forest below was already fading into shadow, trees blending into one dark mass that stretched endlessly in every direction. Up here, the air was colder, thinner. Every breath felt like it belonged to someone else. The stairs creaked as I climbed, each step echoing upward into emptiness. No birds, no wind, just the sound of metal remembering its own weight. The top cabin was still intact. That surprised me. Old fire watches usually rot or collapse or get stripped clean by weather and time. But this one felt recently used. Half-finished meal on a metal table, cold and untouched. A pair of muddy boots near the corner, still facing the door like someone had stepped out and never decided to return. And the radio, still on, static spilling through the small room in uneven bursts, like something trying to speak, but losing its memory every second it tried. I stood there longer than I should have, listening. The static wasn't random. It rose and fell in patterns that almost resembled breathing. Almost. The kind of almost that makes your mind uncomfortable enough to fill in the rest. I turned the dial slightly. Nothing changed. The noise stayed the same. As if it wasn't coming from a station at all. As if it was already inside the device. That's when I saw the notebook, tucked beneath a metal clipboard, edges curled from moisture, pages thick with hurried handwriting. One line stood out immediately. Every night at 2 a.m. it walks around the tower. No explanation. No signature, just repetition. Page after page described the same thing. Footsteps circling the base. Always precise. Always timed. Never approaching too early. Never late. Like it understood structure. Like it respected boundaries. Or like it wanted to be noticed only when it chose. Night arrived slowly. The forest below disappeared first. Then the ridge. Then even the idea of distance. Inside the tower, everything felt suspended. Metal walls, cold air, radio static filling the silence like fog you couldn't see. I checked my watch once, then stopped checking, because waiting made time feel louder. The first step came just after darkness fully settled. Below, on the metal staircase. Slow, deliberate, not rushed, not hesitant, just certain. One step, then another, then pause, like it was listening to the structure respond under its weight. The tower creaked softly in return, not from wind, from awareness. I stayed still near the radio. The static shifted slightly, just slightly, as if reacting, as if recognizing the same rhythm outside. The footsteps circled down below instead of climbing immediately, testing, learning, mapping the space without needing light. Each circle took longer than the last, as if it was adjusting its understanding of me. Then it started climbing, one step at a time, metal groaning under weight. That didn't feel like it should belong to anything natural. The sound was slow enough to count, but I stopped counting, because counting makes things feel closer than they are, and it was already too close. Halfway up, the footsteps changed, not in speed, in rhythm. They began matching mine. Even though I hadn't moved, every pause I imagined, it matched. Every breath I tried to control echoed below. The tower filled with a feeling that something was learning me by imitation, not attacking, not rushing, just copying, perfectly. I finally understood what the notebook meant when it said, walks around the tower. It never said it only walked like itself. The footsteps stopped just outside the upper door. No knocking, no scratching, just presence. So close the radio crackled louder, as if overwhelmed by proximity. The static turned sharp, fragmented, almost like laughter trapped inside noise. The metal walls tightened in my mind, not physically, but in awareness, like the tower had become smaller because something was filling the space around it instead of inside it. A slow movement brushed the outer railing. Not climbing anymore, just circling at my level now, waiting, listening through metal. The watchtower swayed slightly, not from wind, from weight that didn't touch it directly. I pressed myself into the corner without realizing it. The radio burst once more into full static collapse. Then silence. Absolute. Worse than noise. That was when I understood something simple. It wasn't trying to enter. It was learning how long I would stay before I stopped being separate from the structure. The footsteps resumed again below me, perfectly matched to mine, even though I hadn't moved for a long time. And in the dark metal stillness of the tower, I stopped trusting which steps were real. The Appalachian woods were quiet that night in a way that felt unnatural. No wind, no insects, just cold air and dark trees standing too close together. I was alone near a small campsite off the trail, fire dimming into glowing red coals. The forest felt like it was holding its breath around me. That's when I remembered the old warning. An older local had told me once, never whistle back in these woods after dark. Not even as a joke. Not even by accident. I didn't believe him then. I wasn't so sure now. It started softly, a whistle drifting through the trees. Not sharp, not loud, almost gentle. Like someone tried to remember a tune they had known a long time ago. It came from somewhere beyond the firelight, just at the edge where darkness swallowed everything. I stayed still, listening. The melody felt familiar, too familiar. Like something from childhood I had forgotten on purpose. The fire shifted slightly in the windless air, but there was no wind. Only that sound again, closer this time, not moving through space like normal sound should. Instead, appearing in different places, between trees, behind rocks, just outside vision. Each time I tried to locate it, it was already somewhere else, watching without being seen. I made the mistake of answering, not with words, just a soft whistle back, barely a breath of sound, almost instinct, almost curiosity. The moment it left my lips, the forest changed. The whistle stopped immediately, like it had been waiting for permission. Then silence, heavy, complete. After that, the sound returned, closer, deliberate now. The melody no longer felt playful or distant. It felt aware. Each note came with purpose, like it was measuring my response. I didn't whistle again, but it didn't matter anymore, because it already knew I could. Branches began snapping outside the firelight. Slow, one by one, not random movement, circular movement, like something was pacing around the edge of camp, keeping just enough distance to remain unseen. The fire cracked softly, shrinking slightly each time the sound circled closer. I fed it more wood without thinking. More light, more boundary, as if brightness could mean safety in a place that didn't follow normal rules. The whistle changed again. Now it sounded like it was coming from inside my memory instead of the forest. Same melody, same rhythm, but wrong in small ways. Like someone copying a voice they had never fully heard. And the copying was getting better. Too fast. Too accurate. I realized I was no longer alone at the campfire. Not because I saw anything, but because the space around me felt occupied. Like the air had gained weight on the opposite side of the fire. Something standing just beyond where light stopped being useful. The snapping stopped. Everything stopped. Even the whistle paused mid-note. Then I saw it. Not fully. Not clearly. Just a break in darkness. A suggestion of shape. Tall. Still. Too close to the edge of the firelight, but never stepping into it. As if it understood the rule of boundaries better than I did. The whistle resumed again. But now it was no longer searching. It was waiting. The fire weakened near dawn. Slowly. Almost politely. Each flame shrinking as if tired of resisting. The forest around me felt closer with every fading ember. And then I heard footsteps. Not rushing. Not hunting. Just standing at intervals where the ground met silence. Human at first. Then not quite. Then uncertain again. Like something practicing how to exist in my shape. At sunrise, the fire finally gave out completely. Just for a moment, everything turned gray. Cold light replacing warmth. And in that brief emptiness between night and day, I saw the ground clearly. Human footprints leading up to the edge of camp, stopping abruptly. Beside them, larger tracks. Wider, heavier, wrong in proportion. Moving alongside them the entire way. Never overlapping. Never crossing. Just accompanying. The forest was silent again. Too normal. Too empty. As if nothing had happened at all. But the whistle didn't return. Not even in memory. And somewhere deep in the trees, just beyond where sight stops feeling reliable, I knew something had learned what it meant to answer back. The trail disappeared into pines that grew tighter the higher I climbed. Cold air carried the scent of wet bark and old stone, like the forest had been here far longer than anything alive should remember. I wasn't expecting a church. Not here. Not where maps turned blank and compasses felt uncertain in the hand. But it appeared to the fog like it had always been waiting just beyond perception. Wooden structure. Old. Sagging slightly under its own weight. A narrow steeple rising above the trees. Broken at the top like something had once reached for it and decided to stop trying. Stained glass windows still held color, though muted and cracked. Reds and blues bleeding into fog like forgotten prayers. No path led to it. And yet, I stood directly in front of it, without remembering the approach. The door opened with almost no resistance. Inside, the air changed immediately. Thicker, older, like breath that had never fully left the room. Candles lined the pews, melted into heavy shapes that no longer looked intentional. Wax pooled in uneven layers across wooden benches. Symbols were carved into the pews too. Deep scratches, repeated patterns. Not decorative, not religious in any familiar way. Something closer to warning than worship. The silence inside was not empty. It was layered, like sound had been buried beneath years of stillness, and was still trying to rise back up. I walked slowly between pews. My footsteps felt wrong here. Too loud, too new. At the front of the church, I found photographs, pinned carefully along the altar wall. Dozens of them. Faded faces. Hikers. Campers. People who looked like they had once stood where I was standing now. Some smiling. Some unaware. All of them gone from the world I knew. The deeper I went inside, the colder it became. Not temperature alone. Something in the air felt subtractive, like warmth itself was being remembered incorrectly. That's when I noticed the floorboards beneath the pews. Slightly uneven. Not from age. From movement underneath. Slow shifting. Occasional pressure rising and falling like something pacing in darkness that refused to be measured. The church didn't creak, like an abandoned place should. It breathed differently. Night fell without warning. No transition. No fading light. Just darkness settling as if the world had decided the church no longer needed time. The stained glass windows became mirrors of fog and shadow, and beyond them something moved. Not quickly, not violently, just pacing, circling the structure in wide, patient arcs. Always just out of full shape, never fully visible, but always present enough to feel directed at me. The floor beneath the pews shifted again. Closer now. I stopped walking. The movement stopped too, as if it was responding to stillness instead of motion. I realized then that whatever was below didn't need to come up. It already knew I was above it, and that was enough. Then the bell rang. Once. Deep. Heavy. It echoed through the church with a force that made dust fall from the rafters. I looked toward the bell tower instinctively. No rope. No mechanism. No visible cause. Just silence after the strike. The kind of silence that feels intentional, like something had chosen that exact moment to remind me it could. The pacing outside stopped immediately after the bell. Complete stillness returned. Worse than movement, because stillness meant attention. And attention meant awareness. The candles flickered even though no air moved through the church. Wax dripping slowly onto carved warnings I could no longer read fully in the dimness. Then I heard it beneath me, a low scrape across wood, followed by another, closer than before, not random anymore, directional, like something had reached the center point of the structure and was deciding which direction to rise from. The photographs on the altar wall shifted slightly in the draftless air, faces tilting just enough to feel like they were no longer aligned with the room. I backed toward the door without turning fully around, but the door didn't feel like an exit anymore. It felt like a boundary that had already been crossed in reverse. The stained glass behind me darkened further, and for a moment I saw shapes press against it from the outside, not looking in, pressing through memory of what glass should mean. The floor beneath the pews went still again. All movement stopped, not gone, just waiting in a different state, like it had decided patience was more effective than motion. The bell didn't ring again. It didn't need to, because the first sound had already changed the way the church understood time. I stepped outside without remembering the exact moment I moved. Fog had thickened while I wasn't paying attention. The church behind me stood silent again, almost peaceful, almost convincing. But the carvings on the pews stayed in my mind longer than anything else. Not warnings meant for those who entered, but records of those who never left. And somewhere deep beneath the floorboards, something continued pacing, now fully aware that I had heard it breathe. The campsite was quiet in a way that felt almost unnatural. No wind through the trees, no distant animals, just fog drifting in slow sheets across the ground. I woke before sunrise. Cold air pressed against my face as I stepped outside the tent. That's when I saw them. Eyes. Yellow. Dim at first, then sharpening as my vision adjusted. Not one pair. Multiple. They hovered just beyond the edge of my campsite. Not moving. Not blinking. Only watching. Through the drifting fog. They seemed suspended in space, as if the forest itself was holding them in place just beyond reach. I stayed completely still. Even breathing felt like it might disturb something important. The lantern beside me flickered once. The eyes didn't react. But they didn't leave either. Time stopped behaving normally after that. Minutes stretched, or collapsed. I couldn't tell which. The eyes remained in the same positions for what felt like hours. No approach, no retreat, just presence. Like they were waiting for someone to decide when I was allowed to understand what they were. The fog thickened and thinned in waves, revealing and hiding them in uneven rhythm. Every time it cleared, there were more, not arriving, just becoming noticeable. I tried to focus on anything else. The fire pit, the tent line, the texture of damp leaves under my boots. But everything felt secondary to the forest's attention. The feeling wasn't just being watched. It was being measured, quietly, carefully, like something was deciding how much of me was real. The lantern flickered again. Shorter this time, more unstable. Each flicker caused the nearest pair of eyes to shift slightly closer, though I never saw actual movement between positions. They simply reappeared nearer than before. as if distance was no longer a fixed rule, just a suggestion they were choosing to ignore. My throat tightened. I didn't step back. There was nowhere meaningful to step back into. The fog began to hum softly. Not sound exactly, more like pressure. A vibration fell through the ground and into the bones. The eyes remained steady through it all, unbothered, unchanged, like the hum was part of them rather than the environment. I don't know when I realized the circle was complete, but at some point, there was no direction where eyes didn't exist. Front, behind, slightly above the ridgeline, between trees that hadn't been visible before. Every angle held the same silent attention. No gaps, no blind spots. Only awareness surrounding me without contact. The lantern dimmed further. Each flicker felt weaker now, like it was no longer resisting the fog, only delaying its acceptance of it. The eyes responded in subtle waves, not moving closer, just becoming clearer, more defined, more certain in shape. A low sound began to rise from somewhere within the forest. Not a growl, not wind, a hum that matched the vibration under my feet. Slow, deep, continuous. The eyes seemed to stabilize in response, as if they were listening through sight instead of sound. Then just before dawn, everything paused. No flicker, no movement, no hum, absolute stillness. The kind that feels too complete to trust. The fog lifted slightly, revealing empty ground where the nearest eyes had been. Then farther ones disappeared too, one by one, not fading, not retreating, simply no longer there when I tried to confirm them. When sunlight finally broke through the trees, the campsite looked untouched. No signs of presence, no disturbances in the soil, only the faint impression of fog, still clinging to the ground like memory, refusing to dissolve. The lantern stood dark and still. I checked the tree lean carefully. Nothing moved, nothing watched, but the silence didn't feel like absence anymore. It felt like something had finished observing and was now deciding what it had learned. The entrance of the mine was hidden beneath broken rock and tangled roots, a cut in the hillside that the forest seemed to avoid looking at directly. Cold air poured out of it even before we stepped inside. Not wind, something heavier, older, the kind of breath that doesn't belong to open air. My flashlight cut through the dark in a narrow cone. Dust floated through it like drifting ash, slow and directionless. My friend stepped in first. I followed close behind. Neither of us spoke at the start. The tunnel didn't feel like a place meant for conversation. The walls were rough stone, carved by hands that stopped caring halfway through the job. Old wooden supports leaned at uneven angles, groaning softly under invisible weight. Every step echoed too far, too clean, like the mind was returning our movement back to us, slightly wrong. Deeper in, the air changed, drier, tighter, the kind of silence that presses against your ears instead of sitting around you. We found the first claw marks about 10 minutes in, deep scratches across the stone walls, too wide to be human, too consistent to be random. They ran parallel in long stretches, as if something had dragged itself forward using the walls as guidance rather than resistance. My friend stopped walking. I saw his flashlight shake slightly. We didn't touch them. We didn't need to. The marks already felt recent. The tunnel sloped downward after that, steeper, narrower. Our voices stopped echoing properly. Instead of bouncing back, they seemed to sink into the stone and disappear. We used less sound after that without agreeing to it. Just breathing, just movement, just the soft scrape of boots against old ground. The flashlight beam began to feel weaker too, like the dark was absorbing more than it reflected. Then the voice came, from deeper inside the tunnel, calling out, not shouting, not echoing randomly, speaking clearly. Say my name, exactly as I hear in my own head when I think without speaking. My friend turned toward me immediately. I saw it in his face before either of us responded. Confusion that didn't belong to either of us alone. We both heard it. That was the worst part. We tried to answer. I don't remember who spoke first. But the moment we did, the tunnel changed its response. The voice repeated again. Closer. Still my name. But now layered with something wrong beneath it. Like pronunciation learned from imitation rather than understanding. My friend whispered that we should turn back. But even as he said it, the tunnel seemed to narrow behind us, not physically closing, just becoming less certain as an exit. We moved forward instead, not because it felt safer, because it felt like the only direction that still made sense. The claw marks intensified the deeper we went. Now, they weren't just on walls. They were on support beams, on the ground, on the ceiling, all converging in patterns that suggested something didn't travel through the mind. It moved as if the mind belonged to it. The voice stopped calling my name after a while. We almost relaxed too soon. That's when it started using his voice instead. Exactly. Same tone, same hesitation, same breath between words. Don't stop. My friend froze completely. I saw him whisper back, without thinking, I'm here. The tunnel responded immediately. I'm here. Same voice, same placement, same pause, except neither of us had spoken that second line. We turned off our flashlights for a moment, just to confirm what we were hearing. The darkness didn't change. It was already complete in a way light couldn't fix. And in that darkness, the voice continued speaking both of us, alternating, testing reactions, learning rhythm, not repeating, adapting. Then came the running, not from behind at first, from everywhere deeper in the tunnel at once. Fast, heavy, stone vibrating under impact that didn't match human weight or movement. We turned our lights back on immediately. The beams caught only dust and clawed stone, but the sound kept closing in, like distance no longer required visibility to matter. My friend grabbed my arm. We started moving faster. The tunnel seemed longer than before, not changing shape, just refusing to end. Every bend revealed more identical passage, more claw marks, more pressure in the air. The voice stopped imitating us again. It stopped speaking entirely. That silence lasted only a few seconds. Then it spoke directly in front of us, not from behind, not from depth, from right where the tunnel should have been empty. My name, clear, close, too close for anything we had passed. My friend's flashlight dropped slightly, and in that lowered light, I saw it, not fully formed, not fully visible, just enough shape to confirm it was standing in the tunnel, as if it had always been part of it. We ran. There was no agreement, no plan, just motion. The tunnel behind us filled with overlapping versions of our footsteps, some delayed, some early, some wrong in timing entirely, as if the mind was rehearsing our escape in advance. The voice followed, now laughing softly between words that sounded almost correct, almost human, almost ours. At one point, I realized something that made my breath stop completely. The voice wasn't chasing us. It was staying exactly where it needed to be to always sound like it was ahead, like it never needed to move at all, just be present in the direction we feared most. The exit finally appeared as a pale fracture of light. We stumbled toward it without thinking. Behind us, the tunnel filled with one last sound. My voice, calling for me calmly, not panicked, not lost, just certain, as if it already knew I would turn around eventually. We reached daylight without looking back, but the air outside didn't feel like escape. It felt like something had simply stopped following long enough to decide whether it still needed to. And far beneath the mountain, in the dark that never fully ended, my name kept repeating in a voice that was slowly becoming more comfortable using it. Rain hit the mountain shelter in steady waves. Not loud at first, just constant, a heavy rhythm against old wooden walls that had started to soften with age. I reached it late evening, soaked through, boots dragging mud into the small space as I shut the door behind me. The structure was barely more than a hut. One room, one bed frame, one small window fogging from the inside out. Outside, the storm swallowed everything. Inside, it felt worse, because there was no wind here, only pressure, like the storm had chosen to stand still and wait right outside instead of moving on. The smell came first. Wet fur, subtle at first, easy to ignore if you told yourself it was just the rain, just damp wood, just imagination in a closed space. But it didn't fade. It grew, thickened slowly until it felt like it was part of the air itself. I checked the corners of the room, without moving much. Nothing there, but the smell kept building anyway. The scratching started near midnight. Soft, careful, from the door, not urgent, not desperate. Like something on the other side was testing patience instead of force. Long scrape, pausing again. I didn't answer it. I didn't move toward it either. The door was locked, but that detail stopped feeling comforting after the first few minutes. Locks matter less when you're unsure what understands them. The windows fogged over completely after that. Condensation forming patterns that kept shifting when I wasn't looking directly at them. At one point, I thought I saw fingerprints press into glass from the outside. Then they were gone. Then back again. Always slightly different in spacing. Like something was trying to match human shape, but forgetting the details each time it tried. The scratching never stopped. Just circled the structure slowly, moving from door to wall to corner and back again. Always just out of full view. Thunder rolled across the mountains sometime later. The kind that shakes more than it sounds. In that brief white flash, I saw it. A shape standing directly outside the shelter. Too tall for the doorway. Too still for the storm. Covered in wet darkness that didn't drip like rain should. Just clung, pressing against its outline like the storm itself didn't want to let go. And then the light disappeared. And so did certainty. The scratching stopped after that. Instantly. Not fading. Not retreating. Just gone. That silence felt heavier than everything before it. Like whatever had been testing the door had now decided testing was unnecessary. I stayed still for a long time, listening to nothing, which somehow felt worse than the sound itself. Because nothing meant presence without announcement. The smell of wet fur remained. Stronger now, closer to the center of the room instead of the edges. I couldn't explain that shift. Nothing had entered, at least not in any way I could identify. But the air had changed position around me, as if something was no longer outside the shelter at all, just occupying it differently. I noticed the floorboards after that, slight movement beneath them, not crawling, not rushing, just settling weight in slow intervals, like something had chosen stillness and was now adjusting to it. Every few minutes, a soft shift would pass under the bed frame, then stop, then start again somewhere else. Always measured, always patient. The night stretched longer than it should have. Time felt uneven. The storm outside rose and fell, but the shelter stayed trapped in its own version of silence between each burst of thunder. At one point, I realized I hadn't heard the door again. No return scratching, no new movement, just absence of change, which felt like agreement with something I didn't understand. Near dawn, everything changed again. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just settling. The storm lightened outside, rain thinning into scattered drops, and the smell of wet fur began to fade, slowly, almost reluctantly, like something was withdrawing attention instead of leaving. The floorboards went still. No movement underneath anymore. No shifting weight. Only silence restored in pieces rather than all at once. I waited longer than necessary before opening the door. When I finally did, the morning air rushed in cold and clean. The forest looked untouched, as if nothing had ever stood against the shelter at all. No prints, no marks, no evidence. Just rain-soaked ground and fading stormlight. But inside, something remained different. The air didn't fully return to normal. Not completely. Because even after the smell was gone, the feeling of being observed didn't leave with it. It stayed behind. Not as presence, but as memory that something had learned exactly where I was and had decided it didn't need to finish its visit to be satisfied. The campfire burned low that night, tucked deep in a narrow bend of the Appalachian Trail. Cold air settled between the trees like dust, unmoving and thick. I was alone at first. Just the fire, just the forest, just the slow crackle of it collapsing into embers. Then he arrived. No footsteps I could remember hearing. Just suddenly there, standing at the edge of the firelight like he had stepped out of the dark instead of walking through it. He looked tired in a way that didn't match his movement. Clean clothes, but worn at the edges. A smile that came too quickly. like it had been prepared in advance. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. I didn't answer fast enough, and he already did. Across the fire. Already comfortable. Already settled. Like the decision had never really been mine. The fire popped softly between us. He watched it closely, but not like most people do. Not relaxed. Not distracted, like he was studying it, or waiting for it to reveal something. His eyes didn't blink often. When they did, it felt deliberate, too controlled. He started talking almost immediately. Stories about the deeper valleys, places beyond the marked trails. His voice was calm, smooth, almost comforting at first, but there was something underneath it. Like the rhythm of his words didn't belong to conversation, more like repetition. Like something remembered rather than spoken. I noticed his teeth when he smiled again. It was small at first, easy to miss. A flash behind his lips when the firelight caught the wrong angle. Long, pale, almost reflective. Not natural in shape, not natural in alignment. He kept talking as if nothing had changed, as if I hadn't seen anything at all. He said creatures lived beyond the Appalachian valleys, not in fear, not as warning, just fact, like he had met them before, like they were part of the landscape rather than something hidden within it. The firelight flickered once when he said that, only once, but his eyes followed it like it mattered. The air around the camp began to feel tighter, not colder, smaller, as if the forest had leaned inward slightly to listen. He leaned forward too, resting his elbows near his knees, smiling again, too often, too unchanged, like facial expression was something he practiced rather than felt. At some point, I stopped listening to words, started watching how they were formed instead, the way his jaw moved just slightly too long after each sentence ended, the way silence never fully settled between phrases, like something inside him didn't like pauses. Then the fire shifted, not from wind, from pressure, just a brief collapse inward, as if something had passed too close without being visible. He looked at it immediately, faster than before, more precise, like he had been expecting that reaction. He stood up without warning, mid-sentence, still smiling. The movement didn't match the stillness he had been holding before. Too smooth, too rehearsed. "I should go," he said. No explanation, no change in tone. Like departure was just another part of conversation. He stepped into the trees without hesitation. The firelight didn't follow him far. It should have, but it didn't seem interested, as if something about him didn't belong to light in the first place. I didn't hear footsteps this time either, only the rustle of branches that didn't fully break. Minutes passed, then the forest changed again. A distant howl began somewhere deep between the ridges, long, low, patient, not random, not alone. The sound layered with something else underneath it, like multiple voices folding into one direction. Morning came without clarity. The fire had burned down completely. Only ash and cold stone remained. I expected to see traces of him. A path, a mark, anything. There was nothing, except the faint outline of torn fabric caught on a branch nearby. Dark, wet, still, hanging too neatly for something taken by chance. The forest itself felt unchanged, but I knew better than to trust that feeling, because the smile stayed with me longer than the fire did, and the teeth I saw behind it didn't feel like something meant for speaking at all, more like something designed for waiting. The lodge sat alone on a ridge, halfway swallowed by storm clouds rolling in from the west. Wooden structure, old beams, narrow windows already fogging from the inside, a place meant for shelter, or so it claimed to be. We were 6 strangers at night, forced together by weather that turned the mountain trail into a blur of rain and slipping stone. No one spoke much, just the sound of dripping coats and distant thunder pressing against the walls. The power failed before midnight. Not once, over and over, lights flickering out, then returning for a few seconds, then dying again like the lodge itself was struggling to stay conscious. Each blackout felt longer than the last. Each return of light felt less real. When the lightning struck, the windows turned into mirrors of the storm outside, and in those brief flashes, something stood on the hill, always slightly closer than before. No one pointed it out at first. We all saw it. We just didn't want to confirm it aloud. because naming something makes it more permanent. The knocking started after midnight. Slow, 3 strikes. Measured, not urgent, not random, like someone who knew exactly how long fear needed to build before repeating itself. The sound came from the front door. Everyone froze. No one moved toward it. No one spoke. The room itself felt like it was holding us in place. The knocking came again. Same rhythm, same spacing, but closer in feeling than before, as if distance no longer mattered. Only attention did. One of the guests whispered that it might be a lost hiker. No one agreed. No one disagreed either, because outside the windows, the shape on the hill didn't match anything that needed help. Then the footsteps appeared inside the hallway. Not at the door. Inside. Heavy. Slow. Mud trailing across wooden boards that should have been untouched. We all looked toward the corridor at the same time, but nothing was visible there. Only sound. Only movement that refused to show itself fully. The power flickered again. Longer blackout this time. When it returned, the hallway lights were dimmer, and the footprints were deeper, closer to the center of the lodge. No one had heard the door open. No one had heard anything break, but the evidence was already inside. Someone suggested locking ourselves in the rooms, but the idea didn't feel useful anymore, because whatever was moving through the lodge wasn't following rules like doors or distance. It was following awareness. The knocking repeated again, now from inside the lodge walls themselves. Not wood, not glass, from everywhere at once. One of the guests disappeared before dawn. No scream, no struggle, just absence when we counted again. His things were still there, his coat still folded near the chair, but his shape was no longer part of the room, and no one remembered hearing him leave. The storm passed some time after that, leaving only wet silence and broken light. Morning revealed the lodge intact from the outside, peaceful, even almost normal, but inside, every hallway felt slightly shorter than it should have been, like space had been rearranged during the night without permission. No one talked about what happened, not on the trail down, not at the edge of the forest, because explaining it would require agreeing on what the knocking actually was. And none of us were sure it ever stopped. Even now, sometimes, when rain hits within just the right rhythm, it feels like something is still waiting to be answered. The trail was almost gone beneath overgrown roots and wet pine needles. Night had settled early in the mountains, dragging fog low between trees like a slow, breathing weight. I was moving alone when the radio crackled. Old emergency unit. Small, barely holding charge. I hadn't expected it to work out here, but the static came alive anyway. Soft at first, then sharp, then unstable, like something trying to push through broken distance. I stopped walking. The forest didn't change, but the radio did. A voice slipped through the noise. Faint, shaking. Please, is anyone there? The words felt too close for something coming through interference. Too clear, too aware. I answered without thinking. Just a simple acknowledgement into the wind. The radio responded immediately. The voice got stronger, closer, as if my reply had shortened the distance between us. It started repeating my name, not once, over and over, each time cleaner than the last, like the signal was learning pronunciation through repetition. The forest around me felt quieter with every call. Even the insects had stopped. Even my footsteps sounded less certain. I tried turning the dial, changing frequency. Nothing helped. The voice followed anyway, always returning to the same tone, always finding me again between static bursts, like it didn't belong to a station at all, like it belonged to intent. The trail narrowed until it almost disappeared. Trees pressed closer together, blocking moonlight in uneven layers. The radio hissed again, then spoke clearly. My name, followed by silence. Then my name again, closer than before. I realized I was walking toward it without deciding to. Not because I wanted to, because stopping felt like ignoring something already standing behind me. The signal pulled forward through the dark, like a thread I couldn't see, but still followed. Branches scraped my sleeves. Wet leaves clung to my boots. The radio never left my hand, even when I wanted to drop it. Then it changed. The voice stopped asking. stopped calling, and started breathing. Slow, controlled, matched exactly to my own inhale. My steps slowed without permission. The forest felt closer again, like it had been waiting for that synchronization. I reached a small clearing without remembering the transition. Fog opened around it in a wide, unnatural circle. No wind, no sound, only space carved out of the trees like something had cleared it recently. The radio went silent for a moment. True silence, worse than static. Then it spoke again, not from the device, from somewhere just outside the clearing. My name, it said, but it wasn't asking anymore. It was confirming, like it had finally understood what was allowed to call itself. I saw the figure beside the trail first, barely visible between trunks, holding something small, something familiar. Another radio, broken, flickering with weak static. It tilted its head slightly when I stopped moving, like it was listening to how I reacted to being seen. The signal from my radio collapsed into one continuous tone. No more words, just noise stretching into a single thin line. Then even that began to mirror my breathing instead of its own rhythm. The forest felt tighter again, not physically, but in awareness, like every tree was now aware of the same conversation. The figure stepped closer, slow, careful, not rushing, not hiding, just confirming distance like it already knew the outcome. The broken radio in its hand crackled once, and for a brief second, I heard myself breathing through it from a moment earlier. Delayed, recorded, returned. I lowered my radio. The signal stopped immediately, but the silence that followed didn't feel like relief. It felt like attention being fully established. The figure remained where it was, still holding its broken device, still listening, still waiting for me to understand that the conversation had never required both sides to be alive at the same time. The forest stayed quiet after that. No wind returned. No insect resumed. Only the sense that whatever had spoken through static had already found a clearer way to continue speaking without it. And somewhere behind the trees, my name no longer needed a radio to be repeated correctly. The Appalachian Trail no longer felt like a path. It felt like a loop I had already walked too many times to count. Same trees, same bends, same uneven stone markers, half buried in moss. Even when I changed direction, the forest rearranged itself quietly around me, like it didn't care which way I chose. Fog clung low to the ground, thick enough to blur distance into something uncertain. I kept walking anyway, because stopping always felt worse. The first sign was a carving, a symbol etched into a tree I was certain I had passed hours ago. Fresh wood exposed beneath old bark, too clean to be natural damage, too deliberate to be random. I touched it without thinking. The surface felt warm, like the tree had been marked recently. Later, I found another marker, then another, then dozens, all different trees. Same symbols, some high up, some at eye level, some near the roots as if placed there for something that crawled rather than walked. But they all pointed in directions that made no consistent sense, except one. Every so often, they pointed back toward the same clearing. I tried to leave the area. I followed what I believed was a straight path downhill, but the forest refused to change. Every descent curved gently back upward. Every turn ended in familiar ground. Every trail led back to the same open space between trees. Not immediately, not obviously, but always eventually, like the woods were patient enough to let me realize it myself. The clearing appeared at sunset, or what passed for sunset beneath the canopy. A dulling of light rather than its disappearance. And there it was again, the same open space I had already passed at least 4 times without noticing I had returned. The trees around it stood slightly farther apart than anywhere else, like something had made room to observe me properly. The howls started at the edges of the forest, not sudden, not loud at first, just distant pressure in the air, then more joined from different directions, until every side of the clearing carried the same rising sound, not approaching, surrounding. I realized that I hadn't heard birds in a long time, not since the trail started repeating itself. Even insects were gone, as if the forest had removed all unnecessary noise to focus entirely on one thing. Me. The markings on the trees near the clearing changed overnight. I didn't see them change. I only noticed they were different each time I looked away and back again. New symbols layered over old ones. Deeper carvings appearing beneath fresh bark, as if time itself was being overwritten instead of passing. At dusk, I stopped trying to leave. I sat at the edge of the clearing instead. That was when I noticed the pattern clearly for the first time. Every path I had taken didn't lead away. It led back, not physically forced, just corrected, like the forest refused to allow deviation to persist. The howls grew closer, still invisible, still not crossing into the clearing, only pressing against its boundary from every direction at once. The air felt tighter, not suffocating, just aware, like the space itself was becoming conscious of its own containment. Then I saw it, between the trees, not moving, not fully revealed, just present enough to confirm direction no longer mattered. Its outline remained steady while everything else in the forest seemed to shift slightly around it, as if reality adjusted itself to keep it centered. I walked in a circle, without meaning to, or maybe the ground made me believe I did. Either way, I ended up facing the same direction again. The clearing never changed position. Only my perception of distance did. The carvings on the nearest tree now formed a complete ring, when viewed together, a pattern that suggested enclosure rather than guidance. The howl stopped suddenly. Complete silence followed. Not relief, not peace, just absence of permission to interpret sound anymore. Even breathing felt like it might break something fragile in the structure of the forest. That's when I understood what the trail had become. It wasn't losing direction. It was removing alternatives. Each path I took wasn't being blocked. It was being gently returned to origin, over and over, until movement itself stopped meaning escape. Night fully settled, but the clearing remained visible in a faint, unnatural glow. The trees around it stood still, too still, like they had completed their task and were now waiting for acknowledgement. And somewhere beyond the ring of paths I no longer trusted, something remained perfectly positioned at the center of every direction I tried to leave through. The night arrived early in the high Appalachian cold, ice forming on the edges of my tent, breath turning visible the moment it left my mouth. Everything outside felt frozen into silence. No wind, no movement, just a faint crackle of frost settling over leaves. I lay still, listening to nothing when I first heard it. Footsteps, soft, slow, circling the tent, not heavy enough to be human, not random enough to be animal, just deliberate. The sound didn't rush. It never rushed. Each step dragged slightly across frozen ground, like claws tracing patient lines around me. Then it stopped, right beside my head, close enough that the tent wall pressed inward slightly, as if something was leaning in to understand shape, without needing sight. I held my breath without meaning to. The silence that followed felt worse than movement. Then came the breath, warm, steady, pressing through fabric, not entering, not leaving, just existing on the other side of the wall I was hiding behind. It stayed there for what felt like hours, not moving, not reacting, just learning that I was still inside. Then, as quietly as it arrived, it shifted away. Slow circles resumed, wider now, as if it had finished examining one part of me and moved on to the next. Morning arrived pale and thin. The tent wall was marked, muddy impressions pressed into fabric at shoulder height. Not scratches, not damage. Hands, resting there too long to be accidental. And the forest beyond it looked like nothing had ever been there at all. The town appeared suddenly after miles of empty trail. Small, mountain clamped, quiet in a way that felt rehearsed. Even before sunset, shutters were closing, doors locking, lights going out one by one. People didn't linger outside. They didn't wander. They simply disappeared indoors, as if responding to a signal. No one spoke aloud. A man at the diner counter didn't look at me when he spoke. Not after dark, he said. No explanation. No tone of warning. Just certainty. By evening, the streets were empty. Every window sealed. Every curtain drawn. The town didn't feel abandoned. It felt occupied by silence itself. From my room above the diner, I watched the forest edge. It stretched too close to the buildings, as if waiting for the town to forget itself. Then the howling began, low, distant, surrounding the valley from every direction, not moving inward, already present. Streetlights flickered. Between them, something moved. Too large to be a person, too smooth to be an animal. It passed through light without changing shape, as if light didn't apply to it properly. No one reacted. No windows opened. No voices rose. Only silence layered over fear. So practiced it no longer needed expression. Morning returned everything to stillness. The streets were clean, empty, normal. But no one spoke of the night. Not because they forgot. Because remembering didn't change what the town had already agreed upon. Whatever moved between the lights was part of the reason the doors were locked early. The railway cut straight through a forest like a scar that never healed. Old steel, rusted ties, fog clinging to every bend of the line that I followed it because it was easier than the trail, until I saw the figure. It stood near the tracks, pale, still, almost human in shape, but wrong in the way it held itself together. Too rigid, too uncertain in its stillness. Every time I stepped closer, it vanished, not running, not hiding, just gone the moment I tried to confirm it, like distance itself was rejecting certainty. The fog grew heavier as night fell. The tracks disappeared and reappeared between waves of mist. Then came the scratching, beneath the old train bridge. Slow, metal-on-stone movement that didn't belong to anything visible. I shone my light under the bridge. Nothing, only shadow and dripping water. But the sound continued anyway, like it didn't require confirmation to exist. Morning revealed the marks, fresh claw scratches carved deep into steel supports. Not random, not scattered, upward motion patterns, as if something had been testing how far metal would allow it to climb. The pale figure never returned, but the feeling remained, not of being followed. The cabin sat alone in a valley of fog, trees half visible, silence thick enough to feel layered. I noticed the first knock at midnight, 3 slow taps on glass. Measured, controlled. I turned toward the window. Nothing outside, only fog pressed close like breath held too long. The second knock came an hour later. Same rhythm, same spacing, as if time itself was repeating a memory it didn't fully understand. Each hour it returned, never early, never late, always exact enough to feel intentional. By the final knock, I stopped expecting variation. But something appeared behind the glass, not fully formed, just a silhouette briefly aligning with the fog. Too tall, too still. After sunrise, the window was marked, claw impressions etched into frost from the outside inward, not breaking in, just pressing memory into surface. And then silence resumed. But the pattern remained. 3 knocks were no longer a warning. They were confirmation that something knew exactly where I stayed when I pretended not to listen. The waterfall hid the entrance completely, water crashing down like a curtain meant to erase what was behind it. But there was a gap in the rock, a narrow opening, darker than shadows should have been. I stepped inside. The cave swallowed sound immediately. Even footsteps felt muted, as if stone itself was absorbing movement. Bones lay scattered near the entrance. Some old, some not, all arranged too deliberately to be coincidence. Deeper inside, the air changed, thicker, warmer in a way that didn't belong underground, like something was breathing through the mountain instead of inside it. A journal lay half buried in dust, pages describing disappearances during full moons, not explanations, just records, like someone had stopped trying to understand and started only observing instead. Then came the growl, not echoing, not distant, directly ahead, from within darkness that refused to reflect the flashlight beam fully. I stepped closer, without meaning to, and the light caught something in return. 2 eyes, not moving, not blinking, simply opening into awareness where there should have been nothing at all. The cave didn't feel empty anymore. It felt occupied by something that had never needed to enter, because it had always been there, waiting for light to confirm its shape. The ridge was higher than anything around it, windless, cold, suspended above valleys that disappeared into darkness long before the sky did. The campsite was already there when I arrived. Not abandoned recently. Abandoned carefully. Tents torn open but not scattered. Fire pit still warm beneath ash. As if everything had been interrupted, mid-use rather than left behind. No tracks leading in. No tracks leading out. Only the suggestion that people had been here, and then agreed not to remain. Night arrived without transition. The ridge became an edge of silence, overlooking nothing visible below. Then the howls rose. From every direction, at once. Not approaching, not retreating, just surrounding the idea of escape itself. A shape appeared on the horizon line, barely distinguishable from mountain shadow. Too large to be moving casually, too steady to be weather. I held an axe without realizing when I picked it up. My grip tightened every time the howls shifted closer. But nothing crossed the ridge. Not physically. Only attention did. Dawn came slowly. The shadow was gone. But the campsite remained unchanged, as if it had been waiting through the night without needing protection. And I realized I had done the same. Not survived. Just remained present long enough to be noticed. The valley below was completely swallowed in fog. Not thin mist. Not drifting cloud. A solid, unmoving white mass stretching between mountain walls. Locals avoided it entirely, not out of superstition, out of repetition. Something had already taught them not to return. I entered anyway. The moment I did, sound changed. Everything became muffled, distant, delayed. Even my own steps felt borrowed. Shapes appeared inside the fog, not fully formed, not consistent. Sometimes human, sometimes not. Always vanishing before certainty could settle. Then came the voices, soft, familiar, mimicking tones I recognized without remembering where from. Each one slightly wrong in timing, slightly wrong in emotion. Something moved closer, matching my pace without visible source. Not following, accompanying, as if the valley had decided I was no longer walking alone by definition. At the center of the fog, everything stopped. And the figure appeared, tall, wolf-like in outline, still enough that the fog bent around it instead of through it. It didn't approach. It didn't need to. The valley itself felt like it had already agreed on its presence, and resistance no longer felt relevant. The fire was small, too small for how large the forest felt around it. Everything beyond a circle of light disappeared into depth without detail. I kept feeding it wood, not for warmth, for definition. As if light could maintain separation between me and what wasn't supposed to cross it. Something stood beyond the firelight, not moving closer, not stepping back, just existing at the exact boundary where visibility failed. Every time the fire weakened, it shifted forward slightly, not crossing the line, just pressing it, testing how thin protection could become before it stopped meaning anything. The forest felt louder in its silence than in sound. Like every tree was watching, without needing permission. When the fire flickered low, I heard it, not from the trees, not from direction, from right beside me, a whisper without source. Close enough that distance no longer applied correctly. The fire stabilized again, but nothing outside moved away, because whatever had been watching didn't need to approach anymore. It only needed to remain noticed. The mountain began humming after sunset. Not wind, not machinery. Something deeper beneath the ground. A vibration felt more than heard. At first, it seemed distant. Then it became constant, like the mountain had remembered a sound it was no longer willing to forget. Animals disappeared before midnight. No fleeing, no noise, just absence, as if presence had been quietly reassigned elsewhere. Footprints appear around my camp. Huge, heavy, but silent in their making. No sound of pressure, no breaking of ground, only evidence after the fact. The humming stopped abruptly, not fading, not trailing off, just ending like a decision had been made. Then the forest shifted. Something moved between trees without sound, not entering, not arriving, just becoming visible enough to confirm it had already been there longer than I had. The trail should have ended, but it didn't. It only changed shape. Years of walking, camping, surviving began blending into one continuous pattern. Encounters stopped feeling separate. They started feeling connected, like fragments of a single long observation. Every story I had heard matched the same details. Yellow eyes, breathing in fog, footprints too human to ignore, but too wrong to trust, always repeating, always returning. On the final night, I sat beside a fire that no longer felt like mine. The forest around me felt familiar in a way memory shouldn't allow. Not new, not old, just ongoing. Footsteps returned, not approaching from distance, arriving as if they had never left the circle around me. And then it stepped into the firelight, fully, finally, not as a rival, but as confirmation of continuity. I didn't move, not from fear, not from acceptance, but from recognition that movement no longer changed outcome. The fire remained steady, the forest remained still, and whatever had been walking all along was no longer entering the story. It was revealing it had always been inside it,